history in the making, so thank you very much for coming down. We have a very exciting program lined up. We have a bunch of really interesting speakers that I would like to introduce you to shortly. But first, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Shivali. I'm one of the co-authors of the book. The other co-author is Madan, over here. So two of us have spent about 2 years putting this book together. So it's baby's finally born. As you all know, we're, as I mentioned, history in the making. So I'm kind of shaking as I say this. I'd like to invite the very first speaker. Let's get straight into the program. William Kwan, the director of the Arts House. The Arts House has been a great supporter, and I cannot thank you guys enough, so take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Arts House. It's really great to see so many people coming out on this Saturday morning. First, I'd like to thank Shivali and Madan for inviting me to be here, and also for organizing the book launch here. The Singapore Proverbs project actually holds a very special place in the Arts House. We first knew about it about 2 years ago when Madan launched his Indian Proverbs book here, and was telling us about how he and Shivali were going around to collect all the Singapore Proverbs. And as a literary arts center, the Arts House, we feel very, very strongly about preserving our literary heritage and traditions. And it's very important to record them and to spread them as far as possible. So we were very excited and inspired by the whole project, so much so that we asked them if we could use it as a theme for our 8th anniversary celebrations last year. And they immediately said yes. So we were very, very excited. And we used a theme, a book holds a house of gold, as the main theme for our 8th anniversary celebrations last year. And we lifted some of the proverbs that we collected as sub-themes for some of the rooms to reflect the performances that were happening inside. For example, in this room, we had played God of Cookery. So we used the Chinese proverb, without rice, even the cleverest housewife cannot cook. And then we use another Hakka proverb, when it's fine weather, go out to work in the fields. When it's raining, go read the books. So with all these various interesting proverbs that tell us all this wisdom that was so pertinent to us even today. And we also did a project, which you'll see later, a video project in which we sent out a call to people to ask them to come and recite the proverbs in the language, in Tamil, in Malay, in Hakka, in Teochew, in Hokkien, which you'll see later in the video. And it was a very fun project to say the least, but when you watch it, it's funny, but it's also very heartwarming, to retain some of this wisdom and in their native languages. So that's something that we feel very, very proud of. So I guess all this goes on to say that this project resonates not just with us at the Arts House, but with a wider audience. For all the people who participated in the project, for the audience members who came to watch the plays, and for the whole public who came to watch the exhibitions, and I'm sure for all of you as well. So on that note, I'd like to thank all of you for coming again, and I'd like to congratulate both Shivali and Madan for this wonderful, wonderful project. Thank you.
I have to apologize, the video is acting up. I think it's on a holiday because it's a weekend. So we'll get it up and running shortly. But in the meantime, I would like to invite Madan and the exciting panel that I promised. Dr. Kwok Kian Woon, he's the Associate Provost in NTU and also the head of the Sociology Division. More so, he's my professor. He taught me for 4 years, so I'm very glad he's here. Also, we have Tara Jar Hassan, an editor at Marshall Cavendish, and Kathleen Westastri, director at the British Council.
A round of applause, please, for the panel. We have about a 20-minute discussion ahead of us on why exactly we chose Proverbs as a topic, why Proverbs are important for all of us, based on who we are, where we come from, where we are. And I'm going to ask each of them to give a few opening remarks on where they come from as sociologists, as literature scholars, and as cultural diversity experts on why we think Proverbs are something that all of us should have on our agenda. So, Professor Kwok, some thoughts on how you see Proverbs?
Thank you. Perhaps I should stand so that...
Sure.
Good morning, everybody, and it's great to see such a full-size room filled with everybody from different places. Yes, I have to admit that I was one of Shivabi's teachers, and first of all, my congratulations to the co-creators of this book, and also to everybody who has supported them in the whole process. I just make three quick remarks because our chair asked us to only take 2 minutes. So, the first thing I'd like to say is that Proverbs are really precious in that they're quite different from the sort of wisdom that seem to emanate from top down, from somewhere in some higher stratosphere. Whereas Proverbs are very much bottom up. They come from everyday life. They are derived from life experience. They are very much embedded in the fabric of everything that we do on a daily basis. And that is why Proverbs can be regarded as part of living heritage, what we call intangible heritage. And the other thing to say is that when we say intangible, maybe it's not as intangible as we think. I can think of one example, which is that very often we along the way in life, we lose the people we love most, like parents, grandparents, and so on. But they come into our lives again through all these little proverbs that we recall, and say, oh, your grandma would have said that, or your father would have said that, and so on. So this is just, I think, very real, very tangible as a form of heritage. And the last thing I'd like to say is that the book is entitled Singapore Proverbs, and it's got a very nice cover. It looks very delicious, a nice cup of beverage here with the Singapore symbol on it. And Singapore is not just multicultural, and by being multicultural, we have the benefit of proverbs from different languages. And I also note it's not just in Chinese, but you have it in Chinese dialects. You have inflections from different traditions and so on. But I would like to add that proverbs collected in this volume, which I think a fuller version of this book might need some translation from the original languages and so on. What this book allows us to do is to make parallels and intersections between different traditions, so that we can see not only the nuances of differences, but also great similarities in the way such traditional folk wisdom is passed on from generation to generation. So I think I'll stop there for a moment.
Tara, what's your take on this?
That was wonderful, Professor. I really enjoyed that. My background is English literature, and I was a university teacher most of my life, although I'm an editor now. So when I thought about Proverbs, I was with Mother when he released the one on Indian Proverbs 2 years ago. And my two thoughts were, one, when I was a kid and Proverbs were thrown at me, by my parents, I hated them. And I think that's, in a way, it expresses the truism that mostly older people tend to relate better to Proverbs because they're often in figurative language. But it's a wonderful way to convey the wisdom of a tradition or a culture to the young. And very often a lot of Proverbs, if you start reading them and thinking about them, they are by indirection. They're trying to give you some general guidelines about what is accepted behavior in your society or your culture. And as I've grown older, that wisdom has become more important to me because my personal life experience has been to be an expat all my adult life. We lived in mostly Western countries till now. And I'm from India. And so I would read these Indian proverbs, and it was like, okay, this is how we think about things in India. And I also am very familiar with a lot from the Buddha. And those proverbs made me think, okay, so even in the BC years, India was an agricultural society, There are lots from planting seeds and plowing fields. It gives you an insight into that society. And I think for a lot of us that are, especially if you're doing English literature, you are definitely at some stage going to read about the Bible and the inflections of language that you find in that beautiful book from a literary point of view. And of course there is the book of Proverbs, in fact 2 books in the book of Proverbs. So we think of it immediately in connection with Christianity. But other religions and even systems of belief, like we have in India the yoga aphorisms of Patanjali, we don't call them proverbs, but that's what they are. Sutra, the word sutra was really like, in a very short, concrete way, in a memorable way, in one sentence, you conveyed a profound thought. And that's, to me, is really what Proverbs are about. But when Mother mentioned first about Singapore Proverbs, I thought, Singapore Proverbs? Now that's an oxymoron. Because you can have Malay Proverbs, you can have Hokkien Proverbs, you can have whatever, Tamil Proverbs, but what's a Singapore Proverb? So, I did a little bit of research online, and I want to share just 2 or 3, which to me were very nice Singaporean ones. So here's one called, "The early bird catches the Hello Kitty." You had the long lines for Hello Kitty toys, and the police had to be called in. And another one I thought was very nice. 2 is company, but 3 is a GRC. So if you haven't lived in Singapore, you won't get that one. I know there are lots of traditional ones, and since I'm from literature, there's a famous one by Shelley. The poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. And that's something that a lot of us may not know Shelley said it, but it's very telling for a lot of politicians. They're making the laws. But, the poets have a way of showing us a normative reality that has not even become a reality as yet. There are many other writers who have this wonderful capacity to encapsulate the spirit of a time. And there's one by Yeats, and many of you may not know that these words are by Yeats, but they're being referred to in many articles very often. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Now, is that a proverb? No, actually not, of course. It was just part of a poem. But it has got proverbial status in our societies where, especially after the 2 world wars in Europe, where people felt that traditional norms were breaking down. So, what's a proverb can be loosely defined. I could go on forever, but I don't want to bore you. But I would like to share 2 humorous ones with you, because most proverbs are to do with ethics, and they're quite serious, but these ones are actually a little bit ironical, both at the cost of a religion, unfortunately. But anyway, they're fun. There's a Tajik proverb, "Do as the mullah says, not as he does," which turns the traditional one on its head. And here's an Italian one. "One barrel of wine can work more miracles than a church full of saints." And I guess that's true in some ways. I don't know, if you go to Clarkey, it seems true. If you go there on a Saturday evening. So yeah, I think my closing point would be that in today's societies where so many of us are mobile, we don't live where we were raised, we are not living in our countries of origin, they're very nice. They're like a portable way of carrying the wisdom of your culture with you, and also they are a way to get the culture, for new immigrants. They're a good way for acculturation. Because if you look at the proverbs and the humor of a new country where you're going to live, it gives you an insight of what is important to the people of that country. So I'll leave you with that thought.
Thanks, Tara. Let's now come to a different set of perspectives from cultural diversity, from Catherine, who used to work with the Asia-Europe Foundation and is now with the British Council.
I think proverbs can be seen actually from different perspectives, right? From a research perspective, looking at the connection between biodiversity, cultural diversity, and linguistic diversity. It seems that in Africa, in certain places, they have proverbs for a specific plan, connected with specific plans. So just imagine how it's possible to learn more about its culture by just researching proverbs. And that's, for example, what's happening apparently there in a specific study, I think in Ghana, where they're looking at cultural development and using that indigenous knowledge, to look at different approaches, non-Western approaches to culture and development through the use of proverbs. So it can actually go as deep as that, but it can also be indeed, just very close to our lives. I mean, everybody's grown up with Proverbs. I remember very well my mother saying, wie niet horen wil moet voelen, who doesn't want to hear will feel it. So that's always been in my mind when I didn't want to listen. And even when I was living in Holland, there was this international movement called Loesje. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's Loesje is a Dutch initiative, but I think it's international. And they look at proverbs and they kind of subvert them. So you would say, for example, things like, we would say you have to stand with your 2 legs on the ground, meaning you have to be grounded and so on. But actually, she says, well, if you stand with your 2 legs on the ground, you will never move. So it's kind of looking into these things, and I'm interested in seeing how that is working around in that diversity is not only a diversity across languages, but also from the tradition to the contemporary. How diverse does it actually become, and how proverbs can be really universal, but then translated into many, many languages and backgrounds, which makes it really interesting. I believe in the Philippines they have a national proverb. Do we have this in Singapore? Yeah, they have this national proverb and they translated it in 168 languages in the Philippines. So it's kind of also looking at what is uniting themselves as a nation.
And what is the national proverb?
The national proverb is really interesting. It's basically, if you don't look, he who does not know how to look back in the past will not reach his destination. Which I think is interesting. Yeah. But look, I mean, talking about Singapore and its cultural diversity, which is just so interesting, which has to do obviously with the mother tongue and the keeping up of the mother tongue. I think it's an important thing to see because, for example, a language like Hakka in Taiwan is not so many people are still speaking Hakka. And people have been seeing that and saying, well, actually, I think it's important for our generation to continue that and to look at how could we bring that into education. Because as you know, proverbs, where do you learn them? You learn them from your parents, from your family, actually your close, more intimate circles, friends. And then it's the school where you have to learn them and, by heart and so on. I remember that, which is really daunting sometimes. But, a Hakka proverb, I'll read it in Chinese Mandarin because my Hakka is not very good. 宁卖竹中田，莫忘竹中言, which means I would rather sell the land of my grandparents, of my ancestors, than actually to forget the language of my grandparents. And I think it's actually really, really important. How are we actually keeping up, with the different languages in a changing society like Singapore? I think that certain dialects will kind of disappear, maybe soon. So how are we dealing with that? Which, maybe is a reason on the 21st of February, which is the Mother Tongue, the International Mother Tongue Day, to think about that. How we keep that diversity that is around actually in life. And how do we bring it in public space? For example, we have poetry in the underground, but it could also be like proverbs in the underground, and looking at how the proverbs are not just in English, but also in the different languages. And how you learn, because English seems to be always the medium language, but actually it's really nice to actually read just a Bahasa proverb. I looked at one and I thought, okay, that's really interesting. Bahasa, just if my Malay is again. Bahasa menunjukkan bangsa, which means one's use of language will show one's breeding and culture, things like that. So. Proverbs are part of your life and part of your, your connection, I think, with the past. But how are we bringing that forth in the future is a question. And I think there is a way to work around that. And there are, as you mentioned, really interesting things happening that needs to be documented, because it's also that documentation for the future.
Well, it's been a very heavy discussion so far. But let me ask you all for panelists for a more practical recommendation, maybe. How do you think Proverbs can help people build bridges between different cultures? One part of Proverbs is preservation, and perhaps the other part of Proverbs is finding commonalities, building new bridges, etc. Any thoughts on how you think, not just this book in general, but Proverbs in general, how they form a glue between different cultures?
Well, just from what has been said, sometimes we forget how amazing Singapore is, and a bit somewhat perhaps even I wouldn't say frightening, but how dramatic the generations have changed. In Singapore, it's quite common that grandchildren and grandparents may not be able to speak in the same language.
Yeah, I was going to make that.
Beyond fairly common kind of words like, have you eaten rice today? So this, there are many reasons for this. But if you're talking about bridging the generations, not just going beyond to bridge between different ethnic groups and so on, I think Proverbs are very, very important. And that kind of intergenerational transfer of knowledge and wisdom. And what you said is quite right too. Having the Proverbs related in the original languages, I think there's a certain beauty to that too.
Well, I think yeah, he said it very well. No, I mean, it was fine with me. No, I was just going to say, well, you know, my own personal experience, I've shared this before, is when I was raising I was raising a child in Geneva. I was all alone working with my husband, no family. You know, that's when you think of Proverbs. That's when they come back to you. And actually, they do have a universal value. I went to school in English, like most Singaporeans would have done. So actually, the Proverbs that I grew up with were more, when I grew up, I realized more from the Bible. But they're very similar. I mean, many of them are very similar to what you find in the Buddha or Gandhi or anybody like that. There is a universal wisdom, I think, that comes from them, and they are definitely normative. You don't think about it often, but they, I think, do. As we get older, they do give us life directions at times when we might be stuck. I think we don't have access to our own older generations or our own family.
Well, when I was studying Chinese, the only way to learn really Chinese and go to a really, really deep level of Chinese is actually learning its proverbs.
Yeah.
That's the only way to actually understand it. And that's the most challenging part, I would say. So it is that bridge. If you're able to actually, you know, speak with the four character of proverbs, with a native Chinese speaker, they will say, wow, you know, that's really how you connect to me, because that's what is the deepest, you know, in the culture. So I actually think it is. I'm just wondering, you know, with the younger generation, where is the knowledge of proverbs right now?
That was the next question actually. But you mentioned generational gaps. You can see some gaps already. We are all using paper to read our notes, but Shivali was reading from her smartphone. All the notes are digital, so you can already see how it's become a part of the culture. But let's pick up on what you just said. By the way, if you have any questions of your own, you can jump in with your questions anytime. But my question to you now is, how do we make Proverbs relevant for the younger generation? How do you make Proverbs relevant or interesting, presentable, etc. in different ways? One way we are trying, I'll talk about this later on, is putting Proverbs on social media, tweets, SMS, etc. So bringing it into that medium. But what are some other ways through maybe education or exercises, I don't know, that you think we can increase awareness about Proverbs for young people?
Well, speaking of education, I'm not quite sure. We have some friends from the Ministry of Education. We won't ask them to speak officially, but it would be very nice if, as part of language learning, that Proverbs are incorporated, and not just within single languages. Sort of multilingual approach to Proverbs, especially in collecting, as this book tries to do, Proverbs around clusters of themes and ideas. And this could also go beyond just learning one's so-called mother tongue, but also having an appreciation. When I spoke about being multicultural, part of it also involves the challenge of being more intercultural. So learning across cultures. So I think certainly the school curriculum could explore this as part of its pedagogy.
If I may say a word about this, when you were talking of the mother tongue, I lived in Singapore from 88 to 90, and then we basically went away. And now, give or take a few months here and there, we lived here from 2007, and I really see a big difference. Because in the 80s, if you just met most Singaporeans, and you asked them where you're from, they would say, oh, I'm Tamil, or I'm whatever, I'm Hakka, or I'm this or that. There wasn't such a strong sense of Singapore identity. It's very much different now. There is a very different sensibility now in Singapore. And I have a number of younger friends, partly because I used to teach at SMU, I used to also talk to my students about this. And a lot of them say they struggle with this business of mother tongue, because a lot of them have parents from different ethnic groups or communities, the two are not from the same one. So how do you define which race you're from, what's your ethnicity, what's your mother tongue? So like what Professor said, that would be great to have proverbs that are not just in a particular language, but more to do with themes, and that would speak to Singaporeans. That's the other thing. I think some proverbs speak to the young, and others can be so boring. So, you have to reach a certain age to be able to appreciate that wisdom. I don't know if you enjoyed it when your mother told you that one about if you don't hear, is when you, now it makes more sense, but when you hear it first when you're 10 or 11 and it's actually being thrown at you, you don't enjoy it. So I think, if they make a wise choice, it would be wonderful. Maybe just have little, school projects around it. I wouldn't say make it subject course or anything, but something like that would be fun, especially for Singapore, because I think it's important. Of course, you're very multicultural, which to me is a great advantage, and I feel very comfortable being an Indian in that situation. But it's also important for a young country like Singapore to be able to bind the people together around certain common Singaporean type values and themes.
I think that school project sounds really interesting, because I'm thinking actually a lot of the proverbs you see are very creative.
Yes.
And it's about creativity, so it's potentially working around I wouldn't say an open call or whatever, but a way that you bring people from different backgrounds together and actually look at what's really close to them, because proverbs are about things that are close to you. So and looking at what's is close to it in a very diverse group that could come to certain common creative Singaporean proverbs.
All this leads up very well to our next panel, which Shaheen is going to speak about. She's from the Ministry of Education, and she will address some of the educational aspects. But thanks for giving all these ideas and contribute. A round of applause, please, for this fantastic presentation. Shivali is the founder of this project. This whole project would have happened if it wasn't for her insights, her brainwave in how to make this happen. Shivali, please come up and tell us about the project. Shivali and I just got married a couple of days back.
That was very interesting.
If I may interrupt for a minute, I see a few children in our audience. Maybe you had something we should ask them? It's nice one. Do they enjoy proverbs?
That could be something we can address in the next panel. I spent about 2 years, as I mentioned, putting about 1,000 proverbs together along with Madan. This is something I've done for the first time. This is my first book, whereas Madan has written too many books to count. So I want to share a couple of observations. Many of my friends have asked me, why proverbs? Don't you have something more interesting to do? And I found a lot of interesting things going on when I read these proverbs. First of all, they were very easy to read. I have a terrible attention span because I work in television, so I can only pay attention less than 10 minutes. So this was easy to read, and I found that a lot of proverbs actually reinforced a couple of stereotypes. So if you think that all proverbs that you hear remain relevant today, maybe not. And these are some that I have to share. Particularly, I found that, particularly those that were, addressing gender stereotypes, they weren't really relevant anymore, I think. Examples are like, a woman and children are a man's burden, a Cantonese proverb. This is funny. A husband with a beautiful wife needs another pair of eyes. It's a Tamil proverb. Maybe still true, actually. With a good wife, the husband won't get into trouble. A bad wife is worse than a dog. That's another Cantonese proverb. So when I read these, I said, hey, I don't think this is all that true. So having said that, most proverbs, are still very relevant. If you pull them out today, I think they have something to tell you. They address things like, very tacky issues with a good dose of humor. For instance, this one, deep down, all men are alike, and that's the proverb. That's a Mandarin proverb. This one, I just got married, so my mother-in-law is here. This is really funny. results is twins. That's a Mandarin proverb. They're also very easy to pass down. I find if I told someone in their 60s the same proverbs that I read out to someone in their 20s, they of course the reactions were different, but I felt like I could at least share this knowledge with them, so that was nice. They're very short, sharp, often rhyming. So some examples are: even the devil needs a friend, a Tamil proverb. A clear conscience never fears midnight knocking, Mandarin proverb. Another Tamil proverb: you can buy everything except a mom and dad, or children. Also, a book holds a house of gold, a Mandarin proverb. A Malay proverb: an old wound can bleed again. And another Mandarin proverb: for the people who love, even water is sweet. And the last thing I observed is, they have a lot of, proverbs have drawn a lot of parallels to daily life. So, for instance, the sharpest metal can pierce the heart, but also lacerate a boil. It's a Tamil proverb. A Mandarin proverb that says, anyone can buy a good house, but good neighbors are priceless. And last one is, if you fear being hated, then it's best not to be in power. It's a Malay proverb. And my last observation would be, I found that even though proverbs came from different language groups, different cultures, there were lots of common values that they spoke of that was interesting to me. So I think even though we all come from different cultures, different backgrounds, I think some values such as truth, happiness, joy, peace, they're all universal, and I think we've celebrated that in the book. So with that, I'd like to invite the next panel. This is the Singapore Proverbs research team. Again, Madan, would you please?
This project came from Shivali, but there are three other people who played a very important role in bringing this project to light. First is Shakira Daud, head of research for the project. This is Shakira Daud. We'll hear more about her also in the future stages of this project. Second, of course, is Casey Yong. Casey, please come up. Casey is the designer of the cover of this book. He's an absolutely outstanding designer of the books. He designed the cover of the previous book, Many Ships, One Port, Singapore, Expat Tales and Tips. And it was so good, I said I have to get every book that I do after that done by Casey. He's a professor at NTU, and if you want any fundamentals in design, he's the man to talk to. And last but not least, Chris Yong. Chris, please come up. Chris is our publisher. He is with Booksmith. He runs a very tight shop in terms of publishing journals, books, yearbooks, etc. And I've worked with him for at least 4 of my previous books. And I'm going to ask each of them to say a few words, first beginning with Shahira on the research part, how you got the whole Malay aspect of this book off the ground.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming this morning. This is my very first experience at a book launch and one book I've been involved in, so I'm a bit nervous and very excited. Very grateful to all the support I'm getting. Well, the research part has been, it started actually sometime in April. My work actually started sometime in April last year. Some kind of rough groundwork on what Malay proverbs are. The further I got into researching Malay proverbs, the more I realized that there was a lot of, there's so much cultural, besides the cultural part, the values part that our students could actually learn from. Being a teacher, the side of me was focusing on how can I get my students to actually learn these proverbs, because there's a whole treasure trove of proverbs which has not been uncovered by the local Malays here, because I've been a teacher for 23 years and learns being passed on. So as I was doing the research, I realized that there was so much that we needed to do to reach out to the young and get them to learn the proverbs. But the research part was fun, it was tiring. I had to sit many hours in a very cold library, thank you madam, and look for cross-referencing the meanings. And in fact, there were some proverbs that we actually had to drop from the list because, as I was sharing with some of them, there was just no proper match. When you translate a proverb from its native language to English, sometimes you just lose its essence. And I felt that it was an injustice to that proverb if I were to translate it and the true meaning was not reflected. So in my work, I actually opted to cut out some recommended to Madam that some may not be right for publication because I didn't feel good about it. But eventually the final list of almost 300 proverbs, yeah, that we came up with, it was an eye-opener for me as an educator, as a person who's been using the language all my life. It has been an eye-opening journey for me and very enriching, and I hope that some, if not all of this, can be transmitted to the younger generation through education. Yeah.
Casey, tell us about the design and the insights that you got us into this beautiful design.
Well, thanks for having me. I am quite excited to be involved in this project. Initially, when I was thinking of ideas to represent this, there are many things that came to my mind because when you look at the essence of what an image can be, it can be abstract, it can be representational, and it could be quite literal. So I'm thinking of something that could relate to all Singapore, and immediately this gastronomical tapestry, the rich tapestry that we have in Singapore of having coffee, the tradition of coffee, and it may have taken on different forms of these days of having white coffee, but nonetheless the essence is still coffee, where kopi or kopi gao, kopi po, and all this that the older generations can relate to. And so with that, I start to add elements to it, and in terms of other richness that I can also bring into this whole design was to look at what other cultures that I could bring into. So I started looking at some of the representational aspects of culture, such as the Malay culture of having these weaving. So you can see in the book, and due to printing, I think some of that textural richness was lost, but I'm sure you can still see some of that weaving work that was sort of represented in that. And if it's just coffee, then you have that in Malaysia too. So how do you then differentiate that to the one in Singapore? So the flag, the elements of the flag came in, and there are certain rules that you have to abide to in terms of how you can represent the flag. So there are only certain aspects that we could use. So, but with the stars, I think people get the idea that this is something that's representational of Singapore. But for the words itself. Instead of choosing a rich typeface, which I always tell my students not to, because these days you can have a 6-year-old sit in front of the computer and just type some words and they can just be a designer. So I really want to get away from that. So I picked something which I actually handwrote all of those, all these different exploration of using the brush, because I thought the brush is something that's very common, but it's still something that people don't really use much these days, but it's something that is strong in that tradition of writing. It's something that's representational of that writing aspect of their culture. So that also gets represented. But in terms of color, in terms of contrast, if you're talking about the tradition that came from being a graphic communication teacher, so I also tell my students, if you want to have a strong contrast, it's really dependent on the background in which you place something on. So for that, the background is kind of darkened, and the words are placed right on top of it, which is white. And it's also some elements that's adapted from the flag as well. So with that, you have a very strong contrast of black and white. So in many ways, it's also representational of the book having this thing being documented in black and white. So I could go on and on about the ideas behind it, but as long as you get the idea at the end of it, it's really just an epidermis of a book, an outer layer of a book. Most important thing is still the content inside, because that matters more than what the outside should be.
Thanks, Casey. I should also thank the Arts House at this stage. Last year, the Arts House organized a competition for the best design of the book, and we got quite a few entries. And the winner was Casey, and the person who introduced me to Casey, the person who introduced me to Bookseller Outside is Chris, who's also my publisher. Chris will tell us a few words now about what it is like to be a book publisher in Singapore and the various commercial aspects of bringing out a book and not just a textbook. Chris?
Thank you, Madam. Publishers sometimes feel kind of out of place here because of all these creative people around. You just come here and tell you about a book. In Madan's note to me, he told me to talk about the commercial value of the book. As far as that is concerned, I can probably say that, the commercial value to us is a lot because each of us go through different kinds of pains. Shahira, a pain. I've got some bad news for you, Shahira. Actually, your work is not done. There's more. I'll tell you what's more afterwards. Okay, and Casey didn't share with us his pain, but he shared it with me, but I won't tell you. Alright? But if you want to go by strictly commercial value, the retail commercial value of the book is $12.50. The commercial value of the book today is $10. We made it $10 so you can buy in batches of 10. I've also heard from the authors that if you buy in 10, when you autograph, they'll sign the full autograph. Otherwise, you just get initials. Okay. But, it's been a pleasant journey, I would have to say. I mean, I've worked with Madan before in the past. He's a nice author. He doesn't make a lot of demands of you. One of the major problems publishers sometimes have is, editors being very demanding. I want this, I want that, I want that. Madan's very nice. Whenever we send stuff to Madan, they say, okay, this is good, very nice, excellent, great, Sometimes when we give him bad news, we get an ouch from him. Yeah, those of you who have communicated with him through emails, you'll see ouch here and there once in a while. Right? But
ouch is also a four-letter word. I looked at that.
But we look at this not just as a book project, right? To us, it's more than that. It's a Singapore Problems project. And with that, I want to add that we actually are building a website for the Proverbs. And all those Proverbs that Shahira told you that couldn't be included in the book because it doesn't fall into any nice category or theme or large enough, enough numbers to go into any themes. Okay, we plan to put all those up in the website. The website should be operational in about a week from now. The URL is actually in the book, right? If you look at the book, you can see the URL there. We're also going to be including some of the background information to the Proverbs because we obviously cannot include all of them in the book. If we include all of them in the book, it will probably become an encyclopedia or something like that. Right? So go to the website, you should have all those resources there, and that's why I say the work is not done. But they'll be there gradually because there's only one Shahira, one Madan. You used to go get the reason book, right? But it will be up, so we plan to put all those up there. And of course, last but not least, there will be an ebook on the way, probably in a couple of months down the line, so you can get the e version as well. That's what I'm going to say, right? Yeah. Being the last person sometimes has its advantages because actually lunch is served.
Thanks, Mr. It's always good to have a businessman in a book publisher's meeting because he will ask you the toughest question. What does the reader get out of this book? You may think all these nice, woolly-headed, idealistic things about what a book is going to be, but he will tell you what is the reader going to pay for this book. How much is the book worth and how will you make it readable for the reader? Thanks, Ms. A round of applause, please, for before we move on to the launch of the book, there's one more translator I should ask to come up. This is Anushya Algu to say a little bit about the Tamil Proverbs. I don't read Tamil, but we had a Tamil scholar who would collect various Tamil Proverbs from XYZ books and then translate it for us. So Tamil, tell us one or two things about the Proverbs.
Thank you. I am overwhelmed to see such a vast number of friends collected here to give support to Madan in his endeavor of writing proverb books. I must tell you about his school also. He went to Loyola School. The principal was Father Schock from Switzerland. He knew the name of each and every child in his school, and then stand around, I think exactly at 8:30 near the gate to see that all the children came to school on time. Separate them when they are late and so on. So such a very well disciplined school he belonged to. And his English master in the 8th grade called us to receive his progress report. We were wondering why we are called to receive his report. He has to receive it. No. We were called to make mother not write such good English. You know, he writes as an MA student, and the examiners in the 10th grade level, when they pass out, they would not understand what he has written. He has to simply write in simple English everything, but he wouldn't listen to them. Then that teacher, well, earlier also in the 3rd standard, there was one Miss Doctor who was a very, very good English teacher. Hats off to her to have imbibed in him the spirit of, writing good English even today, carrying on with all kinds of interests in his life. She made him start a scrapbook. Anytime you found any impressive sentence or something, just write it down and go through it several times. You'll be a good person. And recently, about 2 years ago, when Loyola School celebrated its 50th anniversary, he went with the first batch of Proverb books. The teachers were also very, very happy. And they said to the other persons, why don't you write books like this so that everybody would understand what you have written? Not those high-tech books on computer science, this and that. We don't understand anything like that. They really appreciated that. Pardon? So, I would like to tell this today, for you all, that is, have you ever tried to say the actual name of the language, Tamil, Ra, which is not there in any other language, that particular letter? Yeah. Please try it. I think some noise is allowed in the audience. Tamil, Ra. Say that Ra, the tongue should not touch neither the tongue should not touch the palate, roof, nor the floor. Keep it in the middle, blow some air, and that is Ra. Tamil. Yes. So that is not there, and in the book itself, you have Parra Mori. That is the proverb. Name proverb in Tamil is Parra Mori. I want you to know that it's a special language in itself. Then a couple of, one proverb that I wanted to share with you. உனக்கு கொஞ்சம் எனக்கு கொஞ்சம் இதுதான் நட்பு. Meaning is, you take a little, I too take a little, and that is how the love spreads. What a nice way of saying, and that is what is required in this world today. Share what you have, and go ahead, passing on the love and affection to others. Thank you.
To the official launch of the proverb. Shivali, please come up, and the speakers also from the first panel. William, please come up. So the official part of the ceremony is going to be an unveiling of the poster. This is a poster of the cover of the book. So we ask our guests to gently, one on each side, yes. Tracy. And you can see the elements of all of our languages. And also the elements from the flag of Stienberg. Thanks, Tracy. And we now like to give each of our guests a copy of the book. Some of you already jumped the gun and had yourself with the book, but that's okay. But we have the official version of the book.
No, I don't know.
No, it's okay. I feel much better now. Thanks. Chris is going to kill me otherwise. But they're supposed to pay for those books.
Actually, I bought my own copy. And the best way to respect an author is to buy the book.
Here. Let's come And now those of you on social media, on the young generation folks, please come up and do the Instagram and PitPic and all that stuff.
Oh, he wants us to get closer?
Of the Proverb. So the next stage is to put the original languages and the translations on the website of the book. Chris, what's the URL of the website? It's SingaporeProverbs.org. It's in the book. Yeah, by the book you can see. Yeah. So anyway, SingaporeProverbs.org. There's also a YouTube video when the book was launched. There's also a Twitter account at SG Proverbs where we tweet a proverb every day or every week at least. The second part of the project is the educational part, and Shahira, why don't you come up and say a few words about how you think we can extend this to the educational aspect. Currently, sort of like a hobbyist collection. We're going to talk a bit more about the educational part.
Okay, like what I said earlier, the book needs to reach out to the younger, a lot of our citizens. And the only way I think we can engage them is, the best way to engage them is through schools. We are looking at coming up with a youth-friendly version, where some of the, what some of them said, the older ones sometimes, some resonate better with the older group, and some will resonate better with the younger ones. So we are looking at coming up with a more youth-friendly one, and maybe even approaching the ministry. I have people from the ministry here who can advise me. So whether we can actually infuse it into some of our curriculum. We are actually considering that right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Shahira. We see Shahira as a very important bridge between the older and the younger generation, taking the values, the older values of the generations to the next generation. And last but not least, we also have a lot of social media with the book project. We have, as I mentioned, the Twitter account, a YouTube video, and we also have a crowdsourcing component of the website, which is a community section on the website. Anybody with their own ideas of proverbs and translations, etc., can get in touch with us. So we're sort of using crowdsourcing to get into the next phase of the project, to get many more proverbs into the pipeline, get them published online in the next edition of the book, and so on and so forth. In conclusion, I would say, okay, we've got a video also to end with, but in conclusion, I would say we think proverbs are so important because proverbs are the wisdom of the people. A lot of people tend to value only experts and gurus and the scriptures and all that, which is okay. But people also have a lot of wisdom, and in a sense, maybe proverbs were the very first form of crowdsourced wisdom of our ancestors, and in a way, proverbs were the first kinds of social media. A proverb fits in very well in a tweet, in an SMS. It can be retweeted very easily. So maybe these were the very first kinds of social media as well. So it's a very interesting cultural phenomenon also. We have a very nice video to show you. This video was shot in the Arts House. We must thank the Arts House for their extensive support every single year for this project. This project was born in the Arts House, promoted through panel discussions in the Arts House. The cover design was created through a competition organized by the Arts House, and we're here today again in the Arts House. This is a video which was organized by Shivali. We got a whole bunch of people to come and read proverbs in the original language, and then they had English subtitles to translate the proverbs. So here you can get a true sense of where this project is going. We would like to see eventually one day people of all generations reciting proverbs in their original languages with English translations in other languages as well. Lisa also has helped us